Welcome to Beetle Blethers with Gerry Hassan and Alan McClure. Recording in progress. Right, welcome folks to a new Beetle Blether, first one for a wee while. And yet again, we are going to be talking about the work of the inestimable Mr. Paul McCartney, the unstoppable Paul McCartney. Gerry, tell our viewers what we're talking about today.
Well, we are going to be talking about the new Paul McCartney album that dropped on May the 29th. It was a bit of a big media and cultural event. We can explore that as well. Album releases now often really aren't that. Most things go under the radar. And we've both waited deliberately a couple of days to give it a few plays, get it digesting. And we're still, I think, we're not at the immediate release. We're a couple of days after that, nearly a week. But it's still early in terms of how we're going to think about that. And I feel everything I'm going to say, and maybe how I'm going to interpret what you're going to say, at least, I'm going to put in that light. I'm still digesting and thinking and, working out what I feel about this.
Yes, very much so too. Did it give you any did you approach it slightly differently knowing that we would be talking about it? Because this is the first new album release since we started doing these chats. And so it's the first time that I've listened to a new McCartney album thinking, I'm actually going to have to formulate some thoughts on this and share them. Did that affect your appreciation in any way?
I suppose, first of all, when the album came on the Friday and on the release date, and I didn't immediately play it because I was building up to sitting down and listening to it. I didn't then do it to Saturday morning. Yes, in the way of properly listening to something. I mean, I'm like everybody now practically. I listen to some music properly and lots of music as background, despite having a expensive hi-fi. And I then sometimes
ladies and gentlemen.
I'm cheating on myself basically sometimes, by not giving music its due, and music and it doesn't affect old things because you have those layers. But with new things, I'm often not giving them a chance, and I do sort of in a very soft way beat myself up for that. But anyway,
yeah. I have to say, well, for that very reason, I'm glad. I like getting to know albums. I like albums as an art form. I'm sorry that they've taken second place to streaming services and things like that. And we both know albums that we've come to know over the years, and we both had the experience of listening to albums back in the day when you had to save up to buy the thing, and you were therefore obliged to get to know it as well as you could and appreciate it as much as you could because you'd invested some good money in it. So I was glad to have a whole. How many tracks are there? 12 tracks?
14.
14 tracks.
It's a return to that Beatles template, or indeed as McCartney did with Late Wings. 14 tracks, a proper meaty album. And I mean, I've grown up, maybe, I don't know if you feel this, but I've grown up with that 14 tracks as my template of what is a meaty album. I like, and I like that with Paul. He's like Red Rose Speedway only has 9 tracks, although it has a medley, it's several, Wildlife only had 8, although it had a couple of link tracks, things like that. So I like a 14-track album, but it's the content that matters, clearly.
It is the content that matters. Well, we better get down to the bones. One thing I'd like to say before we get into the music is we've both been kind of deliberately avoiding reviews and things like that. But I have caught some of his publicity work, some of his PR stuff and his interviews, and he seems to be more relaxed now than I've ever seen him. I think he seems to be absolutely comfortable in the elder statesman of music role. He's enjoying talking to younger interviewers. He's enjoying his status, I guess. And I think I'm relieved to see that I don't think he's all that worried about how this is taken now. It does seem to be a project that he does because he wants to do it, which is when he's at his best. However,
I think in that there is the issue of there's two things that we were touching about earlier on what we're going to talk about here, because there's so much, is because you said, what is the point of this album? That's one point. The other point which feeds into that is what on earth we are reviewing here, because it's so difficult just to review this album, because we're reviewing really what we think about Paul McCartney, the return of Paul McCartney as a national treasure, which wasn't always the case, and McCartney's survival as a creative force at age 83. And so in some sense, all these things, and then the muscle memory of what he did, the 60s, yada, yada, yada. It's an awful lot to take in, and then try and think. And then the music references, and a lot of the music is about those things. and his past and his parents and so on. There's a profound strand of that running through the album. So what are we reviewing?
Well, that's a good question, and it would be lovely as always to hear from folk who are not dyed in the wool McCartney fans or longtime Beatle fans, particularly younger listeners. I mean, I don't know if this is getting any Radio 1 airplay or anything like that. I know he's been denied it in the past, but I don't know if the publicity juggernaut has been sufficient to get him places where people who have not previously enjoyed his work can hear it. But it'd be interesting to know. Anyway. Yeah. So I've tried to suspend my disbelief. I mean, it is, but as you say, it is absolutely impossible. As soon as you hear his voice and you go, it's Paul, it's on top of everything else that you know about Paul and think about Paul and feel about Paul. And so it's difficult to come at it in an entirely even-handed way, objective way, but we're going to do our best, aren't we? So I'll go with my first impressions, because I think I had a more positive first impression than you did, but it might be because my expectations were not as high as yours were, possibly. The first track troubled me a bit, and we're going to talk a bit about the production standards and the kind of variety of production techniques that are going on in here. But I was thinking as that one went through, he's throwing everything at this, including the kitchen sink, and I'm kind of losing the song here. And also, this is where the question about being Paul McCartney comes in. It's like, who is he singing to? There's a line in the first song about, do you ever think of me? And it's like, Paul, anybody that you've had 2 words with in your life thinks of you on a regular basis because you are one of the most famous people in the world. So it was an odd, that struck me first as an oddly disingenuous lyric. But on 2 or 3 listenings, I actually just think, take it as it is. It's just someone singing about a lost love, which we can probably all relate to. And I quite enjoy it now. But having gone from there, I was really pleased that actually there's a lot more variety in the album, as you should expect really from Paul. But there's a lot of variety in the album, and there probably is something in there for every stripe of McCartney fan, I would think, whether you are a fan of the Beatles' output or a legacy fan or just someone who enjoys collections of well-crafted songs. There's going to be something in there that you probably will like, but it will be tied up with what you think of McCartney already. There's nothing in there it couldn't be a new artist. It doesn't sound like a new artist. There aren't any particular musical surprises in there, which is a shame, I think, potentially. What do you think? What would you say about that?
Yeah, I both agree with your overview there, and yeah, obviously, like I have a few different views. I didn't mind. I think As You Lie There's an okay introduction. I think the substantive point you're making underneath about what's he singing about, that's true practically all McCartney lyrics now, in the sense he doesn't specifically say I love John Lennon or I'm still yearning for Linda, but there's all sorts of metaphors about things that have different particular meanings about McCartney. I found, interestingly, that this is where I had the ambivalence. I found side 1 quite difficult to listen to. And the issue has to come up here of Andrew Watt as producer and what he does with older artists. He did with Stones and people like Ozzy Osbourne before. It's not as bad as you could have in the worst scenario, but the pop, rock, power pop songs he does, of which there's 3 on side 1, the second track, Lost Horizon, then Ripples in a Pond and Mountaintop. Some of these are could have been the sound, not McCartney's voice or the lyrics. It sounds like if you play it, and you zone out, it could be anybody. It could be anybody trying to be contemporary and now. And then in side 2, after again a couple of other derivative tracks, it sort of finds better for him. And I think that the coda, the closing coda of songs talking about his parents, talking about either Linda or someone significant in his life, if it is about him, it reminded me of how Brian Wilson ended albums, and also that maybe this album's the wrong way round because it starts patchy and gets better. And it did remind me, although it sounds very different, when people have learned to love Wings Wildlife, one of the views about it is it's the wrong way around in terms of the strengths. The first side is like terrible or got lots of little, bib bob and everything. And then the song about Lennon and all sorts. And so it's a difficult journey as an album. But there is, and I'm still digesting because there's a lot in it. The 14 tracks, the content, Andrew Watt, the songs about Ringo and whether it's George and John or both or whatever. His parents, the war, the Second World War is a big, apart from Liverpool's a big presence, roads and buses, and the Second World War and the shadow of it after the war is a big presence, and those are pretty powerful things, really. And I'm still sort of reflecting on it because, it's just big stuff,
It is big stuff, and I definitely agree that the stuff about, I feel like the stories about his parents are the story that he hadn't really yet told. We've had
Mm,
songs about John, we've had songs either
mm,
about George or inspired by
mm,
George.
mm.
We've had the place name stuff. We've had, I mean, he's already done whole albums about his past, like Chaos and Creation in the Backyard was all lots of references to his childhood, right down to the front cover picture of him as a
Yeah,
pre-Beatle in
yeah,
his back garden. So it's a very, very well trodden route for him and Ringo, and we'll get to the Ringo track. I've no doubt. Um, but yes, no, I do tend to agree. It's a mishmash. There are moments of depth though, and I think that where you posited the notion is it actually about him, and I think a lot of his previous output has been ambiguous, or it's not been clear whether he's just doing a songwriterly thing and plucking a narrative voice out the air. I think these probably are all about him. I think
mm,
that's a reasonable way to read them all, for better or for worse. They are all kind of reflections and reminiscences and reassessments of past relationships and things like that, which is in itself an interesting thing for a man of his age to be doing,
yeah,
and all the more so for a man of his age who has led the life that he has led. So, from a journalistic point of view, or from a kind of memoir point of view,
yes,
I
yes,
think there's going to be stuff that we'll keep coming back to in this album, hopefully for a wee
yes.
while to come.
I think what I've felt about this album, the moment I listened to it, I thought there's two strands of an album going on here. There's the reflective stuff that we'd obviously had to spin about coming anyway, and a couple of two tracks released, and then there's the power pop trying to sound contemporary, something McCartney's always tried to do, and particularly even more overtly tried to do in the 21st century. And I sort of think, really, in a listening experience, there's two albums here,
Mm.
and I personally don't like the second stuff very much, and I whatever some of the issues I could take about like about anybody musically, and who am I to say this, but some of McCartney's lyrics or whatever, there's real something and wonder in the first stuff, and if he dared to have done a whole album about in that vein, I mean, obviously it would have been a different listening experience. It would be more immersive, more courageous. It would have been to some people a bit more one dimensional, i.e. McCartney on McCartney.
Mm.
But he's never done it. Even as you say, Chaos and Creation went into the past. Memory Most Full went partly. Almost Full went. Songs there about pre-Beatles and Beatle days. He's been more and more mining this, but this is the most explicit and the most emotionally literate, really, and the most
Mm.
well, not vulnerable, but as you say, his parents, the war, the fact there's lots of references to Liverpool streets and the geography of the city throughout the reflective songs.
There is. And overtly, I mean, there's the song Open Book or Get Come Inside My Mind. Is that what it's called? Sorry, I don't have the track listing in front of me,
Come
but the
inside,
one
come inside.
where he's basically saying, "Look, I'm answering all your questions. You want to know about me, and I'm telling you." And I do think that that harks back to the attitude I get from him in his contemporary interviews, which is, "Yeah, I've got nothing really to hide anymore. I've got nothing to guard anymore. Everybody, people who want to know all about me can read." In minute detail. If you want to know what he was doing in every day of the 70s, then there are books to tell you that. And of course, the Beatles period is incredibly well documented. And so I feel like,
Do you think?
sorry,
I was just going to say, do you think? I wonder here because I don't know. You don't know, but do we really know everything in the sense? I wonder if Paul's. I mean, Paul still is, in some levels, a very private person, and I'm wondering. I mean, you're right. He's more chatty, engaging, accessible about lots of things. But I'm just wondering if it's not like he's a better PR act now, and also we want to believe him more now, including me.
yes, yeah. Yeah, I'm picking out a few lines or a few bits and pieces here, and there's the line about meeting in Forthland Road and the secret that they kept, or the promise that they kept, that he'll keep to the end of his days, and
Yes,
he doesn't tell us what that secret was,
that's
and
right.
so I think, well, because it wouldn't be a secret if he did, obviously. So it's almost like I'm acknowledging I am more open and I am more comfortable with talking about myself, but there are still little corners here and there that are mine, and they're mine because I earned them. And they're like everybody has their own private bits, which would be of interest to biographers and fans and things, but things that he's going to kind of keep. But to even be sort of hinting at that, knowing how widely people like to speculate about things. We've just had the John and Paul book, that beautiful book
Mm,
describing their relationship as a love story in
yeah.
song. And of course, I think most of fandom now recognizes that they really did. They were like brothers, and they really did love one another in a very deep way. Um, But a lot of people also wonder about the sexuality issue. I mean, John was explicit in his own confusion where that was concerned. Paul has never expressed any particular confusion. I think he's fairly rigidly heterosexual and happy about it, but an ally, you would say, of the LGBT community, and someone who's very happy in his own skin. And so I don't think he minds so much now if people want to speculate what exactly was going on there. Was there a layer of relationship between you and John that we haven't actually got full access to? And are you prepared to sing a bit about that now? And it's interesting. It is of interest to the fans.
Yeah, it is. And you sort of prefigured this at the start. I suppose I came to this. There's been lots of McCartney albums that are a bit patchy, etc. We are in this period of revering Paul, which is right and proper, and appreciating, the fact of the genius of him. And then there's the arc of people talking about the late Indian summer of McCartney, which sometimes people date back to Flaming Pie. And now I'm reflecting on it. I'm not sure how big an Indian summer it is, because I mean, I've never been the greatest fan of Flaming Pie. Obviously, I can appreciate its qualities, but then the albums that have Chaos and Creation, Memory Almost Full to an extent, and then I never particularly have warmed to New and Egypt Station. They just were trying too much. There was too much production going on in them and so on.
Yes.
I did think McCartney 3 was a little bit of a gem, but it's a patch. It's like most of McCartney solo, that the Indian summer is a patchy period as well, and this is too early to tell. It's too early where it fits into the pantheon. And I was just, engaging in contrarian thoughts in my head, as you do. And I was thinking that McCartney's, obviously, his whole proper summer, there's no return to that or how he can compete with himself. But the period of 63 to about, say, 68, I mean, and how he learned classical form and experimental music. Maybe his greatest years music-wise were also related to the Jane Asher years, because there is a drop-off after about 68, and probably that's more to do with like the aging process of youth and how you do songwriting. It happens to nearly every single songwriter, and sort of since 70, 73, where all the soul Beatles had a wee golden era, there isn't. I mean, there's lots of joyful periods, but there isn't much that then competes with even the period 70 to 73. All four had a bit of a fruitful period then, practically coming out the shadow of the Beatles, and then how you compete with yourselves and the expectation and so on is a huge challenge.
Yes, and I mean, I think that we can all be glad that he didn't respond by just thinking, well, I'm not going to bother then, because he knows fine he's not going to recreate Eleanor Rigby or anything like that. He hasn't got the team behind him. He's not living the same life, and he's a much, much older man. And it's an energetic business, writing songs and bearing your soul to people. And your energy is not what it was when you're in your early 80s. But I'm with you on New and Egypt Station. Neither of them grabbed me, and it was mainly about. There's some great songs on them all, doesn't it? He's never done an album of wholly terrible songs. I don't think he has it in him. But because we like to approach the idea of the album as a kind of a unit as a whole, and that's partly his own silly fault for introducing that concept with Sgt. Pepper and things like that, and suggesting that, so sorry, Paul, but you've made you've made your bed, now you can lie in it. It's almost like he's outgrown the album format is not as satisfactory as it was, because any effort to link things, like doing the old reprise at the end of the album or something like that, looks, after the first time, like an effort to recreate the glories of the past, and having 4 or 5 thematically linked songs in amongst a bunch which are just kind of, as you've described them, MOR, maybe Radio 2 friendly rockers, almost weakens the idea of the concept. And maybe what Paul really needs to do is write, because he's spoken about this in the past, write a musical about a particular thing, write a musical about childhood in Liverpool, so that we're not confused, so that we're not halfway through listening to your lovely reminiscences and then getting hit round in the head with what sounds basically like an old rocker trying to sound like a contemporary youthful band.
I know, or a tribute band to a bad Nirvana, or something, if they had continued and sold out, it's it's a tough ask, and as you just said, the album as album, and music as music, I mean, when I've looked at a couple of like people going on with the album, etc., there have been people talking about where is the place of music in the 21st century, a lot of it is, sounding like an old fart. A lot of it is the corporatized, mega stars, etc., and the people that even the music mags don't bother reviewing because they can't get a handle on them, like Taylor Swift, Beyonce, etc. And I do sort of feel that it's partly the decade I grew up in, which is the late 70s into the 80s. The music that relates to the stuff people are going through now is mostly, with the exception of obviously some indie stuff, mostly missing songs about us now and like Brexit Britain, or people struggling to get a job, young folk or old folk get their hip operation. I mean, I can't imagine a song about that, but I'm sure there's one out there. And
I'll give you one in about 30 years' time, I should think.
That's made me think about Paul sometimes. Paul, if you take Wings, and I like Wings, and I think Wings have become more and more sort of celebrated. Is Wings, even in the 70s, are divorced from, I mean, McCartney's whole career is practically divorced from the times he's living through, apart from when he comes down to talk about like the death of Lennon, etc. There's odd, obviously, episode, and I do sometimes find that cumulatively a bit wearing.
Yes. Well, I think there's a thing. There's a bit of a problem. I think the Kinks went through this as well. The Kinks, who we've both agreed in the past, I mean, their run of albums from about 66 to 70 is for my money, they're the only band that really challenged the Beatles in terms of that impeccable run of songwriting. But after that, when they got back into the States, the Kinks, and turned into a stadium rock touring band, that is a boring life, and it's a boring life to write about. And they did write about it. And it's a bit like when it's almost like writers writing about writer's block, which I've read a few of as well. There's a late Joseph Heller book called Portrait of the Artist as an Old Man, which is just about him struggling to think of anything to write about. And it's conceptually valid and fine. But at the same time, you think, well, if you can't do it, don't do it. If you haven't got it in you, don't just force something out that's examining how difficult it is to do what you used to do. It's not really adding anything to the conversation. So, I mean, yeah.
I was going to say, what you're saying is true of all. I mean, in fact, we're even still talking about them like this. It's true of nearly all the 60s dinosaurs and survivors. So, God forbid the fact that the Stones continued, and much as I do love the Some Girls album, because I think it's the last great Stones swagger. Really, after 72, they'd been better if they'd broken up. Because the way Mick prances about and all the stories of them, with the exception of Some Girls, they're really adding nothing. Obviously the touring entity and merch and all that, and same with the Who and so on. And I suppose, I mean, McCartney is compared to Dylan, rightly, but I think anyway, and I'm a much bigger McCartney fan than I'm a Dylan fan. I think Dylan's Indian Summer, the way he has addressed aging and the times we are living through, and America, more compellingly. So what is it? Rough and what's it called? I just forgot what it's called. Rough and
Rowdy Ways.
Rowdy Ways, yeah. And the long track Tempest on it, which is about from JFK to Lennon and so on.
About 20 minutes or something, isn't it? It's a long,
a whole side of a CD. Well, so it doesn't take up a whole, but it is on a whole side of a CD. I found that amazing. I found that really taking a risk and saying something to people, important.
Yes, I think there's a sense. My Dylan fandom is probably higher than yours. I mean, he was an absolutely formative. I mean, I can hardly bear to listen to him. He's that good, which is an odd thing to say, but it's like I really have to sort of prepare myself because it's like going to a particularly special and important place in my development. He's less of an enemy to himself than McCartney is because he's always been an iconoclast. And he's always been very clear that the recorded version of the song is not the definitive version of the song. He's not a hit maker. He's not a record maker, really. He's a singer, songwriter, performer. And he's been able to sustain that as he's aged because you can, if you are overtly not attempting to be what you were in your 20s, then you have kind of a more of a free pass. Leonard Cohen would be another obvious example of someone who really understood what was going on in his own development and his own kind of psyche. I mean, he never really sounded like a young man, but that he embraced his aging voice. Shall we talk about Paul's voice in this album a bit? Actually,
yeah. Well, because I'm not too uncomfortable with it, really, in a way. Now I think there could be issues here of AI and all sorts, and brick walling going on because Andrew Watt's very renowned for that, infamously in some circles. and some people, when I've heard a few bits, have said they don't care about AI, etc. Just the love of Paul. I do care. I care if what we're hearing is human creation rather than a machine creation. But overall, I don't think it's to me the voice in lots of tracks is well placed in the production and doesn't jar too much. It's more like when Andrew Marr, makes it sound like there's 10 Paul McCartneys playing with him or something. That's my issue.
Yes, I mean, I think I actually thought it was a real strong point, and I don't know Egypt Station very well, and McCartney 3 I've only listened to 2 or 3 times. So, but this did seem like he is on the journey to embracing his current range in a way that a lot of the criticism he comes in for, and you know how I feel about critics, they can but he always wants to play the old songs in the original key, and that is a strain for his voice. And it's quite nice to hear him now writing for the instrument that he now has. And I think the more I listen to it, and maybe the more you listen to it too, we'll come to appreciate that's a thing that he's being more straightforward. But as you say, there are these 2 or 3 bits in the big rockers where it's a big heavenly chorus of 20-year-old Paul McCartney's, and we know that's not him. And you can use, I don't know if it's AI or if it's just a wee bit of auto-tune that's going on in there. And you can use auto-tune as an instrument. You can sort of self-consciously use it as an effect. And we know that the Beatles would have embraced whatever effects were available to them back in the day. So it's maybe not fair to criticize him, but if it's compensating for having written in a range that he can no longer reach, then maybe that's slightly problematic. Maybe it'd be nicer to hear him doing a whole album of songs that he can just sing without really much jiggery pokery.
I thought that the closing 3 tracks, which is first Star of the Night, which opens with It's Raining in Costa Rica, because that's where he first came up with it, composed it, and then about his parents, Salesman's Saint, and then Mama Gets By. Apart from the fact it's a very strong concluding 3 tracks, looking at aspects of his life, is I think in all those the production doesn't get in the way of the melodies and the subject, and his voice on each of those is moving, and that those 3. I mean, I was going through this album on my initial first listen, going, I'm really disappointed. I don't like this album. I'm blah blah blah. I'm not giving it a chance, And then when I've got to the end, I'm thinking, right, I've got to have to rethink, and it's then made me think about the order of it, etc. But funnily enough, when I've been listening to this album, I've been going back to, also completely unrelated, to listen to Tony Bennett, because I'm a huge Tony Bennett fan. And Tony Bennett continued singing until about his 95. And Tony Bennett went through, obviously, a very different kind of singer, a crooner and all that, and a sort of interpreter. But the aging process can, done well, really enhance people's the pathos, and if they have the muscle and the intelligence to do the interpretation that age has given them, it can work in your favour.
Yes. Didn't Tony Bennett play Glastonbury in his 90s? I think one of his last
very late. And he had a huge Indian summer of revered albums that are, for the most part, lovely, like tribute albums to Frank Sinatra, his friend, and so on. But I wonder, you see, with this album, and we're saying, what it is we're reviewing and trying to come to terms with, right? There is a little bit, and I've seen just some of the headlines, there is a little bit of overcompensation going on by some of the critics, I think, that want to love this album. Now, I think it's Rolling Stone, who haven't read the review, who say something like this.
They do owe him.
Exactly, that's the point I'm making. I think they call it a masterpiece. And so there's overcompensation. There's then the want of people to, every Paul McCartney album practically, since Band on the Run, or the one after that, has been lauded as a return to form. And often the best since Band on the Run. I mean, there's the Italian chap whose name I forget, who's written all these. Luca, yeah. He remembers that when Press to Play came out, it got quite a few good reviews saying McCartney's return to form before it was then slaughtered commercially, and it subsequently has been slaughtered, but it's got its champions. So we are in this way, the repeat wheel in a way. We're still living with.
For me, the trio of the McCartney 1, McCartney 2, McCartney 3 have a sense of purpose behind them that the others do not have.
That's right.
Or the others do have a sense of purpose, but the purpose is, I still want to be in the charts, folks. I do still want to have hits, and I do still want to be a contemporary pop star. I don't just want to be a relic. And completely understandably and completely justifiably, and goodness me, he has earned the right to do that if he wants to do that. But I've been rereading the McCartney Legacy book, the first one, which is a meticulously detailed account of McCartney's early 70s.
Yeah.
And I've been reading a bit about Ram because I've been getting back into Ram, which is obviously just a delight to listen to. And, no question, we would not be having to kind of capitulate and look for good things to say about something like Ram because it's just magnificent. It's a match to a lot of the Beatles material. I think we both feel that. Yeah. But the process is all over the place. He's not a very directed artist. He's a scattergun artist who is assailed by ideas and assailed by songs, and no doubt these days assailed by offers of collaboration and offers of production and things like that. And I just don't think his strong point is necessarily thinking of unified themes or unified sounds, even unified sonic landscapes. And because he's a magpie and he often references, if you go back to a Beatles album, he references this. If you listen to the White Album or you've listened to Abbey Road, there's all kinds of different styles, but it's not really the same because the unifying factor of the four voices is a much stronger one, and George Martin is a much stronger unifying factor than anything that Paul can do on his own. And so you do end up with these slight mishmash, slight kind of Frankenstein-y creations where there are glimpses. Like, for example, in is it Memory Almost Full that's got Jenny Wren on it? It's Chaos and Creation, isn't it? Yeah. I think that song could have been on any album he's released throughout his career and been a highlight. I absolutely love it. I know other folk are ambivalent about it, but I think it's beautiful. I don't know that there's anything of that caliber on this album. I don't know if there are any stone cold classics that, come the distant day when he finally departs this mortal coil and someone puts together the best of his whole career. What off this album is going to make that cut? I'm not sure that there is anything.
Yeah, I think you're right, and you're on a theme that I was thinking about with this album: McCartney and collaborators. And he's sometimes chosen well. I mean, I think the Elvis Costello collaboration worked really well, and I totally. Some people grieve this, but I totally understand why him and Elvis did not put it all into one album, because they didn't want it to all be defined by one album. They wanted to spread the goodies, basically. But the issue of Andrew Watt isn't just a production one here. Andrew Watt has got 5 co-writing credits, and post Beatles, Linda apart, knowing my Paul history, this is the biggest number of co-credits on an album since Denny Lane on London Town. So this is a significant partnership, and I've got a great reverence for what Denny Lane brought to Wings and what of his voice and so on, and his co-harmonies with Linda, etc., etc. I'm just not sure what Andrew Watt's bringing here, really, in terms of, apart from his very contemporary production. But it's
I wonder.
Significant collaboration.
It is significant. It's a funny one. I don't know Andrew Watt at all. This is the first I've actually come across him.
He did the Stones' Hackney Diamonds. It was Paul that recommended Andrew Watt to the Stones. Interestingly, and it was after he'd done because his sort of genre is aged rockers. So he did Ozzy Osbourne, making him more contemporary, and Iggy Pop. So Rick Rubin, he is not. It's the exact opposite of Rick Rubin in a way. He's an anti-Rick Rubin.
Right, now imagine if this album had been produced by Rick Rubin. I was just thinking, I wonder why Paul, I don't wonder, it's very obvious why he likes working with folk from the next generation, or now 2 generations down, from youth, with the Firemen, which was an exciting project of co-writes.
Yeah, that worked well. That's one of the other ones that worked tremendously.
Yes, but then on to, I think, was it New that had about 12 different producers working on Andrew Weatherall and all kinds of, and it's a mess. It's got highlights, but it's, in terms of cohesion as a unit, as an album, as we like to listen to albums, it does not do that thing, which is create a whole sonic world that you can lose yourself in. And this one, I don't think does either, unfortunately. It's not far off. And with a wee bit, if he'd come to us and asked us, Gerry, we could have told them. But it's...
Well, he recorded 25 tracks, so there's potentially 2 albums here, and they may be that, obviously it's not the White Album or something, but it's possible. My thought was, the reflective albums. I understand why, like what you're saying, he's done what he's done, but it makes for an uncomfortable listen in a way, because you're jumping massively style wise, and lots of us are used to that, but the style jumps are so significant. But an album of Paul looking into his past would have been a much more powerful, poignant statement. And I think the world's ready for that sort of thing from Paul.
Yes, I think so. Shall we talk? Because we've been highly critical, and I mean this is a departure for us because we usually like to just go on about how brilliant he is. I mean I've got to restate I do like the album, and I will be listening to it again. I think, and I'll be it's I just like getting to know albums, and we are both, I think, equally delighted that he is still alive and well and energetic enough to be making such a thing. That's, that goes without saying, really. But how about musical highlights? What are the ones that stand out for you that you think you will definitely go back to and revisit?
Well, because it came out before the album, Days We Left Behind, I thought that was very reflective. I mean, I like all the reflective songs, really, in different degrees. I like the taking us through early Liverpool. It gives the album its title, so it's its anchor point. I really like the last three tracks, as I was saying. I really like the way that coda. I do think the tracks about the Ringo track and the track potentially about George or about early Beatles days, they're both. I mean, they both have something, but I think they're both a bit weak. And I think a couple of the tracks, but some of the tracks, which are positive and negative, don't hang around very long. They end quite abruptly, just as you're trying to get into them.
Yes.
It just has that, which is neither quite to say a positive or negative. It's just you're sitting trying to get into it, and in the end.
Well, I quite like that. I mean, that's a thing that I noticed when I was first getting into Wings was either songs went on 4 times longer than they needed to, or they were not. They're a bit unfinished. It's a habit of his. So you get wee tiny ones like Single Pigeon and things, which could have been extended into longer pieces in the Wings albums, but then you also get the massive long medleys and things that go on for a long time, and you've
and some people criticize Ram, for example, that how dare they, that things like beautiful tracks like Backseat of My Car are what, nearly 6 minutes. There's a repetition of harmonies going on as the coda continues. And I mean, I've always loved Ram, and to the point, when I first heard it, and you weren't meant to like it, it's one of my first secret loves.
Yes,
one of my first secret loves with Paul.
Yeah, you were talking about the Ringo track there, and that is obviously one that's going to get a lot of attention just because every time those two do anything together, it's as people act as if they haven't worked together since 1970, which is ridiculous because they never really stopped working together. And Ringo's on Flaming Pie and sings on Flaming Pie on Beautiful Night, and obviously we just had Now and Then a couple of years ago with the pair of them collaborating on that.
We were on all those years ago with George as well, obviously, with
of
Denny
course,
Linder,
Of course, yes, yeah. I mean, Ringo is a great collaborator, and if you could get him, you would, wouldn't you? But it's not as newsworthy as they sometimes make out. It's not like they are have been estranged partners for 40 years or anything like that. They've been pals and collaborators. But the song itself, you likened it. Am I allowed to say what you likened it to? You thought it was it was kind of like a Ruttles pastiche almost.
That's right. I thought it was like somebody hearing the Ruttles doing a pastiche of the Beatles and then trying to do a pastiche of the Prefab Four, basically. Well, and I love the Ruttles.
Yes. I mean, funnily enough, I thought the same thing, but framed in a different way, in which it reminded me of 90s. Some of the, so I'm a 90s kid, well, 80s and 90s, but I came to my musical notions and development mostly in the 90s with the advent of the guitar bands, and there were definitely tiers of the kind of the upper echelons of the guitar bands, the ones who could write great lyrics as well, Pulp and Blur and some of those lot, and Long Pigs and things. And then there was like the second tier, and then there was also a third tier, Menswear and the various things like that. And they were all chucked together on a series of compilation albums called Shine, the Shine compilations, which were good fun and still good fun if you want a wee glimpse of 90s pop. The Ringo and Paul song reminded me of something that you would have heard on a Shine album and nowhere else. And I wonder who that was. I wonder if they did anything else. And that in itself was almost like a sub-Ruttlesy genre as well. It was a self-conscious reclaiming of some 60s tropes, because the big bands, Oasis and Blur, were self-consciously referencing the Beatles and the Kinks and things like that. And so a lot of maybe less talented, but briefly commercially viable bands came along and thought, well, we'll have a crack at the whip there. And I was thinking, Boo Radley's or Dodgy was the band that came to mind, who were fine, and absolutely fine. But it's just got that jing, jinka, jing, jinka, jing, jinka, jinka, jing. and it's nice. But as we've said before, Ringo, this is all that Ringo ever writes about himself these days. And his albums, he's got like 8 albums which are just him writing about his childhood in Liverpool. And so it's not new.
No, but he's never done a proper like candid album like the hospital years, you know. I mean,
No, I
that
know.
sounds a bit sarcastic, you know. But let's also just acknowledge that the Ruttles are one of the key influences in Britpop. You know, we're basically agreeing here, you know.
Yes, indeed. Well, didn't but I think Noel Gallagher had to acknowledge Neil Innes in the song
Right.
"Whatever" because he maybe deliberately or not had pinched the melody for "How Sweet to Be an Idiot," which is a far superior song, much as I like "Whatever" by Oasis. But yes, so yeah, that one's a bit of a. I mean, it's a toe tapper and it's harmless, but we want to be able to say more about a McCartney song, and especially one that is a collaboration with another Beatle. It would have been lovely to have it maybe a little bit more staid or a little bit more reflective, musically reflective. The lyrics are sort of reflective enough, but it's not. It's just a jaunty little jinky jinky jink, and it's also there's no mention of people being battered with hammers or things like that, which is what Ringo experienced, and you know it's a funny one. I'm glad they did it, and I hope they enjoyed doing it.
This is a total just me tiny little pedant point, right? This in a very, very tiny way annoyed me in terms of like when I've glimpsed at some of the reviews and seen the online comment from, you know, like rock critics. It's referred to at the same time as Paul's 20th solo album and his 27th post Beatles album, which is clearly is both. But it's like suddenly we're taking I mean, one of the most dominant ones is calling it the 20th solo album. Suddenly we're taking Wings out of the equation. I'm thinking, to my mind, no, it's the fucking 27th post Beatles album. Stop taking Wings out of it.
I wonder what Paul thinks of that. I wonder if that's actually in some ways a bit of a triumph, because I think maybe having Wings acknowledged as an outfit, as a self-contained project, might be to his liking. I don't know.
I haven't seen MPL press releases. I wonder, because it's been quite a standard trope. I wonder, is it coming from MPL Communications or whoever, you know, because it's been quite a lot over media and, you know, like say broadcast media coverage of this album. But I wonder if, I mean, clearly Paul's going to tour live as long as he can, and great stuff. It'd be nice if he played some contemporary tracks from this, you know, rather than the same set list he's been doing for 20 years and, you know, some deeper cuts and so on. But this could be the end, capital T, capital E, of the studio albums. I hope not, but it might be Paul's final statement. And
that's been not that. I mean, it's hard not to have that thought in your head when you're listening to an album by an 83-year-old. It's hard not to wonder how many more of these we're going to get. And it's no Black Star, you know. It's not his farewell to this realm album. So if it ends up being that, then it will have been a bit of a shame. I accept that, you know, leaving with a jaunty wave and a few jokes and some sing-along tracks is actually probably much more fitting for Paul than a somber Cohen-esque, you want it darker kind of thing would be. That might be hard to believe. So he is who he is, and we love him for that.
I mean, no, you're 100% right. But there is a strand of that in there that shows what he could have done if he had decided to do that project. But I do think that, you know, well, I mean, we both said this, so I'm sort of contradicting myself. The curate's egg approach of Paul's albums, some of Paul's albums do. I mean, Chaos and Creation had a common sort of bit of a common theme, common sound. Some of the 70s albums, London Towns, like it or not, I mean, I quite like London Town. It's got a common sort of yacht rock feel because that's where it was created. Band on the Run, similarly, has a similar sort of feel, even a little bit of a concept running through it. And Ram, I mean, you were saying Ram is a bit of a hodgepodge, certainly hodgepodge lyrically wise, but there's a sort of like in its crazy overproduction, there is a you know unifying sound to Ram. There's even a unifying sound to the ramshackle Wildlife.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'm a big fan of Wildlife. I listen to it regularly. I mean, not that regularly, but I reach for it off the shelf fairly regularly because I think, as I've said this to you before, I love the sort of, you know, things like the basement tapes by the band. I like hearing bands in their early putative phases where they're still feeling each other around and sort of working out what they are and having a fairly free spirit about it and not being too polished. I do like that. This one is almost like the opposite problem. Is it's overthought and overpolished to some extent. We should acknowledge it is much easier now. I mean, the things that took Jeff Emerick and George Martin, weeks and months to work out techniques. How are we going to get this thing that John's asked for? How are we going to get this sound? You can now just do with a touch of a button. You can make Beatles sounds. You can even, heaven forbid, get an AI to do it for you. You can type in a lyric and say, make this sound like the Beatles from 1968, and it will do a passable job of doing that. I mean, please don't do that, folks, because it's terrible. Don't do it. But
they take bits out of Beatles songs, as they have been doing the proper Beatles catalogue, and stick them into, like, my mind, Frankenstein creations,
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Like, that was a problem I had with the Now and Then, which I did enjoy now and then, but claiming it as a full Beatles track because you've lifted some harmonies off the back of Sun King or whatever it was they pinched the harmonies from, is questionable. It's not, and I think a lot of folk felt a little bit, just tell us what this actually is. Don't try and make it more than it is. So there was a song on there's a song on this one, the Magic Mushroom one, is that On the Mountaintop?
Yes.
Which is a jolly one, but it's definitely trying to go for that psychedelia thing. And the one issue I've got two issues with that. One issue is Paul was not the psychonaut of the band in any way, shape, or form. We know that he experimented with acid, but he experimented carefully with acid. He's a cautious fellow where his own health is concerned, I think, and more power to him for that. But doing in your 80s, a sort of reclaim the psychedelic summer of love with a Magic Mushroom song, that's not his job. And the other thing is, do you know the song from the George Harrison album, the 79 one, Soft Hearted Hannah?
Yep.
I fell in love with my soft-hearted Hannah. It's lovely. That's such a great track. It's such a stonking, jolly, good fun. Sounds like George reclaiming his sense of fun after a fairly dour decade. And the McCartney one on this one, the Mountaintop, just sounds much more contrived. There are sort of there are Melotrony sounds in there, and there are bits and bobs of backward tape loops and things. And you just think that's what AI would do if you asked it to orchestrate this song. And we really want more from you than that.
Yeah, I also think that I agree with you. On if we call it side two, the track Never Know also has a whole pile of what defines it is like playing with like 60s sort of retro sounds and what sound like recreated backward tape loops and so on, and it goes out and comes back in like that, and I'm thinking, well, what's the song? It's all the soundscape, the sound collage is lovely. But I'm thinking, but when you did it in 60 years ago, it was for the purpose of like, Tomorrow Never Knows or not something maybe as amazing as that, but other tracks that were songs.
Yes, and it was brand new, and it was a physical thing that somebody had to do. The Tomorrow Never Knows is a great example, because if you think about the way they had to actually physically string those tape loops around the studio, and miking up drums came on in leaps and bounds just with that one track, because they need to get Ringo's beat properly, and each of these things was an advance, and now it just does sound passé. My favorite bit though of orchestration, I think that there's an absolutely lovely kind of big band arrangement in the background of one of the songs about his parents. Is it the last one?
Salesman Saint, second last. Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Absolutely lovely, and you can imagine Paul just grinning from ear to ear as he does that. A lovely wee tribute to his father's musical background.
He's the trumpet on that track, isn't he? So that was his original instrument, obviously.
That's right.
So it's even a homage to himself, how he was introduced to music before he played guitar, and that's just lovely. It's a lovely track, and it made me those closing tracks. The two tracks, First Star of the Night and Salesman Saint, one of them, or the feel of both of them, invoked a little bit to me. There's a feel of like how he's done things like Baby's Request and what people used to call Paul's granny music. That I don't think people use the term now, because why should we insult grannies?
Yeah.
But they're beautiful. It's a gorgeous. That is how. Yes, everything about the production, the arrangement, orchestration. I think Giles Martin's involved in a couple of these tracks. And tell you, just add to them.
Yes. Yeah, so I mean with those kind of redemptive bits, I think there are enough of those little moments where you go, oh yes, no, that's him, and that's his playful side, and that's his thoughtful side, and that's his romantic side, which is certainly still there, of course. There are enough of those bits to save the album, I think, and I suspect also there are going to be a couple of tracks in there that maybe didn't hit us in the first couple of listenings that will grow. Maybe we'll figure out what they're about. One thing that did pop into my head was, how difficult is it for him to write a love song for Linda still? Because I feel like there is at least one on the Here, which is definitely about her.
Yeah.
what does his current wife, is that awkward for Nancy? It
I,
must be a bit.
I thought
It's,
that.
is it what are the politics there for him? It must be odd.
And are you? I mean, because Paul has said in somewhere. I mean, and I'm not 100%. I think he said that the closing track "Mama Gets By" isn't personal, but you
Right.
don't write lyrics like that and it not have some relation. It might not be directly about Linda, but it has some relationship to his emotional experience.
Yes, definitely. Well, speaking as a songwriter, I think it is possible to think that you're not writing about yourself and then
Mm-hmm.
only realize later that no, you absolutely were writing about yourself. I mean, John did that with talking about, oh, how do you sleep? Well, it turned out it was actually about me. We don't always know what the motivation is. And Paul is very open about the fact that he feels that sometimes he's channeling something from somewhere else. That if that place is your own subconscious, then
Yeah.
that place knows you. It knows you, and it knows what you are dwelling on. And even if you think you're framing this in a sort of fictitious storyline song, then sometimes those can be, in a way, the most revealing. So I think it probably is about him, whether he meant to write a very revealing song or not. I think it can't not be
It's also
about
about
him.
somebody being saved in a way, but saved by the
Yeah.
love of a good woman. And the term "mama" is an American expression. It's never anywhere in British popular culture. And so it sounds like about Linda and Paul in that period, 69, 71.
Yes, which is a love story for the ages, lest we forget. And he should write about it. He definitely should write about it. And I'm sure, is it Nancy is his current wife, isn't she,
Yeah.
Nancy? I don't know anything about her at all, really. She's not one who comes to the limelight, particularly as far as I can tell. But I hope she's secure enough in their relationship to realize that there were others before her. I'm sure she's above Heather in the in the wife ranking, but not that we should do that.
There is the Beatles unreleased track on the White Album, Heather, which may never get released,
Oh,
which
that's true. Yes,
is about Heather McCartney,
it is.
Linda's daughter.
I have a bootleg of him doing that with Donovan. Have you heard that bootleg?
I'm not sure I have. I've heard I'm not sure it's the same one. I've heard the Beatles sing it in the studio.
Ah, right. Yeah, he did. There's a wee tape of him jamming about with Donovan in which they use the phrase "we're nice people too," which I thought was quite funny. But
Yeah.
yeah, so so is he restricted in his, because his life didn't stop in when Linda died. It didn't stop when John died. He's had to carry on living and building new relationships and seeing his family grow, becoming a grandfather,
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff.
Releasing 27 post-Beatles albums, and then, of course, the experimental albums with Fireman, and the other experimental albums, and then the classical albums,
Yes,
and
yeah.
then the albums that are McCartney albums that weren't like Thrillington, the orchestral Ram, the McGear album, the Denny Lane Holly Days tribute album to Buddy Holly, which is basically a Wings album. There's all
Yep.
these things he released, and now we even understand that Paul has always had this experimental side of him that has now been celebrated. But even when he was Mr. Hitman in the 70s and Mr. Squaresville to the rock press, he was releasing all these things under other names, like straight hiding in plain sight.
Yes, which is a lovely playful side of him, I think. And also we cocking a snook at the press, I think if they're not giving me a hard time, well, I'm not going to tell you it's me then. But it always leaks out, and I suspect it's usually leaks out because he's decided, no, I actually do want people to know that this is me. I would like some credit for this because I think it's good.
Because John said he always knew that Thrillington was Paul McCartney, but popular culture and the music press didn't. And when I got it when it was re-released and we knew it was McCartney, because I quite like a bit of cheesy listening. Obviously there's lines I can't go across, but I've always found that a cheery, cheesy, joyful, lovely tribute to Ram and the beautiful melodies of Ram. And
yes, and also again a tribute to his dad's music, I think, or the generation before. Which those tributes that he does, I mean, for all John dismissed them, and I suspect John didn't really dismiss them. I think John understood what they were about. They are genuine love letters to the previous generation, and that's a great thing in music. I think the worst mistake a musician can make is imagining that they're doing something brand new that's never been done before, because you're not. Whatever you're doing has been inspired by something that you've heard, either consciously or not. And we're all working in a form that is well established. Even people who are now being touted as avant-garde. Angelique, have you seen those? Are they French? Angelique I can never remember the name. Potin, and they wear funny big headdresses and they play microtonal music and stuff like that. That's being hailed as some great new advance, and it's actually, well, listen to some Zappa or listen to some Primus or listen to some. There are lots and lots of folk who have used, or listen to some Harry Partch if you really want to get into microtonal stuff, or some gamelan music from Bali if you want to. It's all out there already. All the possibilities are there for everyone to grasp. So I think consciously hailing back to music of the past that you've loved or that's meant a lot to you is a good and generous thing to do, and I like it when he does it. And that's I think that's why that Salesman Saint will probably end up being my favorite track on the album, and one of my favorites from Paul in quite some time.
I think in my sense of how it is of a time, it feels like timeless to me, and it feels like authentic, all these cliches we all use now, but it's also like a good tune. It's got a good tune, it's got a good set of stories in it, it's got characters, and those are some of the ingredients of like what makes a great song. And I think some of the other ones, the reflective ones, I'll work through what I think of them, but some of them are a little bit maybe not fully developed. That's what I would think. But they are interesting enough. What I'm just going to suggest is one thought is, I don't know where this goes in my McCartney pantheon, the 27 albums and the other ones that I've just mentioned. But I think what we could do as a follow-on from this is we could do our McCartney pantheon. What are our favourite McCartney albums?
Okay, yes, that's a good idea. Yeah, well, viewers, please let us know. We'd love to hear what you think. And yeah, but I think it won't be at the bottom by any means. I don't think for mine anyway. There'll be albums that I listen to less than this one, probably. But most of them have been in the last 20 years, I would have to say. For all folk talk about, I mean, I quite like Press to Play, and I like Off the Ground. When we were talking to J.R. Moores about his book Off the Ground, I gave the album a good listen. And although, I mean, it is more, I suppose, middle of the road than would really float my boat, or certainly would have floated my boat at the time when I was enjoying grunge and stuff like that. I just think it's a really accomplished album of good songs. And of course, you've got, like you say, you've got the rest of the Elvis Costello stuff on there too. And those really are a cut above. I mean, making Paul pay attention to the lyrics is always a good idea because he can do it. He's got good stories to tell, and he's got good little wacky turns of phrase, and he likes a wee joke here now and then. And I think for him, lyrics are often quite secondary, and they'll come with the melody, and if they fit, then fine. I don't think he holds himself to the highest of standards where really trying to get lyrical depth is concerned, because he's concerned with the sound, and if they sing well or if they fit the melody well, then that's enough for him. But I think that's. Sorry.
I've never been an off the ground fan, and I missed it when it came out because I was having a period out with revering Paul's music, and so came to afterwards when there was then the uplift in return of interest in Paul's solo career, and I've never been able to get fully into it. I mean, I'm just admitting my own prejudice here to an extent, and also just things like some of the dreadful lyrics like "Biker Like an Icon." And then even things like, this is a very marginal point, it's got a dreadful cover.
It does have a dreadful cover. At least the cover of Dungeon Lane is nice, isn't it?
All these things matter, and when we started by saying what is the point of this album, it's there needs to be no point other than the fact we've got Paul with us and he's doing what he wants to do, making music and being creative and being spurred by that impulse he has, that he's had for the last 64 years, when I'm 64, and long may he continue to be with us.
I think that's an excellent place to end on, Gerry, and I totally concur. And I hope folk will go and give it a listen. And if anyone wants to let us know what they think of it and what their highlights are, we would be delighted to hear. But yeah, thank you very much, Gerry. Lovely chatting to you as always. And we'll see you soon. All the best. Bye, folks. Right, great. So, thanks, folks. See you next time.